Dr. Jerry Jampolsky is the founder of Attitudinal Healing, and along with Dr. Diane Cirincione, they started the Attitudinal Healing International. Tonight's topic is going to be death and dying, loss and grief. And many of the principles that are in both of their books cover a lot of techniques that we can all learn from in terms of dealing with death and dying, loss and grief. So let me start by asking both of you how you got started with this concept of attitudinal healing.
Well, it began when I was making rounds at University of California Medical Center, and an oncologist and I were seeing a child who was 7 years old and had severe cancer. And the child asked the doctor, "What's it like to die?" And I saw fear going in the doctor's eyes, and he changed the subject and asked this little kid about his bowel movements and never responded to the question. And I said, "Well, what goes on in a big #1 top hospital? Where do kids go?" And I found they oftentimes go to the cleaning lady in the morning, who's kind of cleaning up the dirt off of the floor. And I was meditating the next day and had an internal guidance, if you will, to bring children together to help each other, to talk about things that are very meaningful, like what is it like to die, and their fears about getting chemotherapy and all the other kinds of stuff. And so I gathered about 11 children together, ages 5 to about 12, and asked them if they would like to join me in this adventure, and they said they would. They did ask to meet at night and have a free dinner given to them, and we started. It had its own energy, and after a while we began working with their siblings who had their own problems, and their parents and the grandparents, and we run a number of TV shows like 60 Minutes and the CNN, Mr. Rogers, and other kind, and people started wanting to get training. So all of a sudden we began doing a lot of work around loss and grief, and how do you deal with death.
Now, how long ago was this? This was many
1975. 1975. No, yeah, it was 1975. I'd become a student in A Course of Miracles, and I applied many of the principles of attitudinal healing from A Course of Miracles, but I tried to make it more practical so that an atheist could deal with this. We're not a religious organization, but we're very much spiritually oriented about really feeling that much of medicine has forgotten a very important part of healing, and that is the creating a place where our spiritual light and love can be recognized.
What now? You started with. I'm going back again. You started when you heard about a child who had a terminal illness, and who asked, "What's it like to die?" Out of all the kids you worked with, can you give us a memorable story about how attitudinal healing helped a child deal with his situation?
Well, first of all, our centers are involved in helping other people. And when you're helping other people, you're not thinking about your body or your cancer or all the bad things that could happen in the future. About 3 stories I can remember right away. One is a kid named Greg Harrison. He was 11 years old. He'd had leukemia, maybe 10 different chemotherapies. None of them were working. All of them caused a lot of bad side effects. And he decided he didn't want any more of that. And he talked to his parents about that and his doctor, and they all agreed that they weren't going to do any more chemotherapy, which meant he was going to die probably in 2 to 4 weeks. And at the next meeting that we had, I was the facilitator, and another 11-year-old kid asked Greg, "What's it like to know that you're going to be dead in a couple of weeks?" And I, being the facilitator, I said, "Gosh, how am I going to make this an easier thing for Greg to deal with?" And while I was thinking what to say, just Greg started to talk, and he was very calm, cool, collected, relaxed, and said, well, I think when you die, what happens is you just discard your body, which was never real in the first place.
Wow.
And then you come to heaven and you're one with all souls, and sometimes you act as a guardian angel to someone. And there's never been a question in my mind that when I meditate, when I pray, when I talk to God, that Greg is part of this prayer, that he's there helping me all along the way. Another kid from Japan, Japanese, he was dying, and I was making a house call, and I was holding his hand, and I thought he was asleep or in coma. And then I decided after about a half hour to tell him, I have a tape recorder here in my briefcase, and if you can hear me, maybe be willing to tell other people, other kids, because other kids that are 13 years of age and dying we're going to be seeing. You're the first kid we've seen. What advice would you give them? And all of a sudden he got up, woke up, took my recorder, and said, tell everyone that as long as they're breathing, their total function and purpose in being here is to give love with every breath. Well, these kids.
Well, what wisdom in a young
well,
child.
I learned that all
Amazing.
these children who had cancer and were facing death were really very ancient spiritual teachers in young bodies, teaching me and other people another way of looking at life, another way of looking at death. Another memory I have is a dream I had after we'd been working for a couple of years. It was a dream with all the children who had died. And we're at the top of a mountain, it was flat, and the kids and I were holding hands going in a circle. And all of a sudden they let go of my hand and they went up in the air and turned into light. They just turned into light and just disappeared. And that was just a reaffirmation for me that the work we're doing in attitudinal healing and helping kids and adults see death differently, and in helping doctors see death differently, we're on the right track. And so part of our healing and attitudinal healing is that everyone's there for their own healing. I'm there to find more inner peace, and so are the kids.
Oh, that's great. Dr. Cirincione, how did you get involved with the attitudinal healing movement?
Well, yeah, I met Jerry in 1981. That's a whole talk show in itself, how that happened. About 9.5 years later, we were married, and we've been together now about 32 years. And, but the question you asked about your first thoughts about death and dying, and two things come to mind. One was a very early experience when I'm thinking about 3.5 or 4, because I remember I was very small. But I remember one day literally looking at my 3 fingers, my thumb and my first 2 fingers, and sticking the nail of my thumb into my second finger, my third finger, and thinking to myself very clearly, and I was kind of annoyed, I remember that, thinking, this is a trick. I'm like stuffed inside this skin, and now I have to stay here.
Ooh.
And it was like this total awareness that I was more than my body, and the resignation of I remember sighing, thinking, oh, well, I guess I just have to stay here a long time. But that was my first awareness, and I never lost that awareness that there was something else beyond the body. I was thinking of when I began the work in attitudinal healing around 1981, 82 with Jerry. A few years later, a mother sent us a drawing that her daughter had done, her young daughter. And her daughter was early school age. I think she was about 7. Jerry, the mother said that the story was that the mother's biggest fear was always that she would lose her only child. The daughter came home from school one day on a Friday, and she said, Mommy, I think I'm going to die. And the mother said, oh, no. It's just like, you're perfectly healthy. There's no way you're going to die. She said, I think I'm going to die. She wasn't upset. She just said it. She drew a picture for the mother and gave it to the mother. Saturday, she got a little sick. Sunday, she was sicker. Monday, she died. And the picture that she gave to the mother, which the mother sent to us, a copy of it, was a little girl and then a spiral going all the way up. And there were images of her up to where she became like an angel. And there were tears down here and less tears. And when she got to the top, she was a little angel. And it was like a clock, but it was a spiral. And there was it was like 3 o'clock on this drawing. And she died exactly at 3 o'clock.
Amazing.
On that date. And it was so that again reinforces for me that there's another way of knowing, the intuitive way of knowing things and what is that's beyond the 5 senses and the program body that lives in the physical world, that's run by the personality ego structure, which is all of our different personalities and all the stuff we go through and all the things we learn. I think that the idea, the concept of death and dying, I mean, I think most of my actual experience comes in the 80s working with individuals who had AIDS. And dozens and dozens. And I did support groups at the time. We had many people die at that time because not that many people were surviving. And the profoundness of it, the privilege of working with people as those in hospice understand.
What's your most memorable HIV client?
Oh, there were so many because their lives ended in different ways. Some took their lives, most didn't. Well, I'll give you an overall feeling first, and then an individual person. The second principle of attitudinal healing. The first is that the essence of our being is love, the true essence. And if the essence of my being is love, then yours must be too.
And for the listeners, Dr. Jampolsky and Dr. Cirincione have written many books, but in a couple of them they have the 12, well, many of them, they have the 12 principles of attitudinal healing, which many of them are.
But you have in one of your first books. That's how I was introduced to you.
Actually,
the Hawaiian Diet.
I actually included the 12 principles for attitudinal healing in my very first book, the Hawaiian Diet Book of Hawaiian Health, because I thought they were all so Hawaiian.
What year did that come out, your book?
That was in, I believe, 1991
or classic.
so.
That's a classic.
Yeah.
So these principles are very generic, and people of all faiths and all cultures use them.
Right.
And so they don't interfere with someone's, theology.
Right. It's not a religious thing.
No, not at all. That's
they're
why
just fundamental,
exactly.
Basically universal principles of.
Well, we call it practical spirituality, actually.
Right. Yeah. And so I just wanted to finish that one story, Jerry. So as far as the persons with AIDS, the second principle is that we define health, true health, as inner peace, and healing as the letting go of fear. So we work with a lot of physicians. We've lectured at, at least 25 medical schools. But this concept is a different way of looking at healing. So persons with AIDS that I worked with, they could be on their last breaths and their bodies were racked with all the effects of AIDS. But they had found inner peace and they had let go of fear. And to me, they were the healthiest human beings I'd met. Because I know some people that are star athletes and they are terrified of life and they have no inner peace. So to me, they're extremely unhealthy. And then you asked about an individual one, and I remember there's an individual that Jerry and I really loved, and he was very creative person. And he had asked us to go to see the quilt, the large AIDS quilt, which was at the Moscone Center in San Francisco.
Famous,
Right, and of course San Francisco was the residential home of the first real AIDS epidemic in San Francisco General, which we worked with the physicians there, and we were all learning together. Anyway, he asked us to go through, and that was one of the most profound experiences because every second or third quilt, he or we knew people. And I asked him, I remember asking him, I said, Terry, we stopped for a moment. I said, what do you think this is all about? And he just looked at me with the most peaceful look on his face. And he said, I think it's about learning. And I think that many of us signed up for this so that we could help give people the opportunity to go beyond their fears and beyond their prejudices and to come to the place of love. He said, it's not an easy assignment, but it's okay.
Amazing.
I never forget that. It was about 4 or 5 months before he died.
One of our principles in attitudinal healing is that everyone is an equal teacher, student to each other. And there's a kid named Paul Johansson who was about 12 years old. and he was in the hospital, really dying of cancer, and they thought that he was going to die maybe any day. And then all of a sudden he woke up and shared a dream that he had that night. And the dream was that he was asking God for more time because he felt he had more people to help. He'd been coming to the center. And God agreed with him. He said, yeah, I'm going to give you more time. And that, right after he said that in the dream, he asked for a Big Mac. He hadn't been eating for about 2 weeks.
Oh, my.
And all of a sudden he started to gain weight. He got involved in those days. We had not too good a communication with technology, and I created a program where people could talk to each other and help each other, children and adults both.
The phone pal, pen pal. It was like an early internet.
And then this program, and then when 60 Minutes came, they asked me, what do I find most interesting? Well, I said, this conversation that Paul Johansson's having in New York, and Tony Bartarini, who lost his leg and is dying of cancer, they showed part of that program. That program, Terry, not only went to everyone in the United States, but it was so impressive with so many people that it was in Australia, in Germany, and in
Amazing.
Russia.
In Russia.
So I always remembered that dream that he had. I'd like to help some more people, not dreaming.
And he
was
wound
gonna
up
be
doing
helping
it.
millions upon millions of
He
people.
wound up doing it.
And he would come out to visit our center on occasion. And I remember one time one of our benefactors, John Robinson, let us use his limousine. So where did the little kids want to go? They wanted to go to McDonald's. So all these kids with bald heads got out of the car and what have you, and had their bald time. And unfortunately, I had to clean the limousine and get it back to John, but the kids had a great time.
As I recall too, Jerry, I remember that you told me, I met you in 1981, but you said early on there you were afraid of dying.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that these children are the ones that helped you grow through that.
Yeah, both of my parents from the old country, they were very afraid of dying. I remember one time I went to a funeral with my father. I think he was about 93 years of age then. And after we went to the funeral, he saw a hose and he was washing his hands. I said, Dad, what are you doing that for? He said, well, it's an old custom from Russia that when you go to a funeral, you don't want to be the next one to die, so you wash your hands of all the death around you so you won't be next. That was their belief system, if you will.
So I think that the subject you bring up, though, Jerry, is that there are so many different belief systems about death and so many different customs and so many religions. And I think that's really often what guides us or guards us through this journey of living and dying.
No, it was not by accident that I started working with children who were dying, because number one, I was afraid of dying. I was an alcoholic. I was a militant atheist. And I remember even as a 13 or 14-year-old, I heard on the radio that soon they're going to be able to when you die, they're going to put you in a freezer, and then 20 years later, you're going to get out and they're going to shoot you with a medicine and you're going to be able to live again. Well, I thought that would be a pretty great thing because I was so scared of dying, not really realizing how foolish that was. But that was the amount of fear I had. And so unconsciously, these kids, helping kids deal with death was a way of helping me deal with death and let go of my own fear about dying.
So truly, you had a book. Didn't you put together a book about collecting the wisdom of the children?
Yeah,
Something about children as
We're
teachers.
just releasing it.
What was it? What was it
Well,
called?
Well, it's called The Rainbow Behind Every Dark Cloud. Was the first book. And I felt the kids learned by helping other kids, so they wrote this book, which I helped edit. And then the siblings wrote a book, Another Look at the Rainbow, and then we had a book, Advice to Docs from Kids.
Advice to docs and other big people with kids.
Right, advice to docs and other big
Because-
people
because,
from children or
Yeah,
from kids.
because so
Yeah.
often the
That's
doctors
It's a really good book.
aren't so honest and
Yeah.
clear with young kids. So
And the other was Children as Teachers of Peace that you were
Children
thinking
as
of.
Teachers of
It's a
Peace.
10-year project.
Now, if people want to get any of those books, how would they find them?
Well, they can either go to our website,
Mm-hmm.
www.ah, for Attitudinal Healing, ahinternational.org.
So it should all be there.
all the books and more information about attitude, not just around dying of the physical, but you know, when someone gets a divorce, that's a death, and there's loss and grief there. One of the things I learned earlier was to bring people to my home who were suffering loss and grief, from someone dying. And so I was able to create a safe place where people could be crazy. We don't live in a place in our culture where it's safe to be crazy. And it was a place where these people could share the fact that they felt the presence of their lost husband, was lying in bed with them, talking with them, saying everything's okay, don't worry, and not feel they're going to have someone take their sanity button away.
Right.
And so these things have now continued throughout the years now, and they have regular weekends where people can come to deal with their loss and grief, as well as weekly programs. There's a program in Texas where children in the school, where children can deal with loss and grief. What about animals? For example, one kid named Bobby, and he just got a diagnosis of cancer. He's going to get chemotherapy the next Friday at Stanford Hospital. And the kid didn't say anything. He was pretty shy. But at the end of the group meeting, he said, you know, I feel so much love in this room. I think what would help me if I knew that everyone in this room would send me love at 4 o'clock on Friday when I'm going to get this chemotherapy, and I'm scared of needles. So everyone said, sure, we'd be glad to do that. And then the day before, I get this emergency call from Bobby. And I said, Bobby, what's up? Why are you so upset? He said, well, they changed my appointment. It's going to be at 1 o'clock. I want you to call everyone and tell them to send love at 1 o'clock, not 5 o'clock. Because he was a believer. He believed that when you send love, it is received. And this same family, by the way, called me maybe a few months later, and they had a dog, 13 years old, an older son, 9, and then this little boy, Bobby. And the parents called me and said, you know, this dog we've had all this time, but the veterinarian says it's time for him to go. We should take him to the hospital and have him being helped to leave this body. And the older brother said, absolutely not. If you're going to do that, you might as well take my brother there too. I don't want you to take our dog there. So they asked, what should they do? And I was a smart enough psychiatrist to know I didn't know the answer. So I told them to come in and see me on Saturday. And they all came in on Saturday, and we talked for an hour. And I didn't have any kind of answer for them, except I had a real intuition that if they could deal with this for another week, that something would happen. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, the older brother calls me and says, Jerry, I decided to change my mind. I think it would be helpful and more peaceful for my dog not to be in pain anymore. Under one condition. I said, what's the other condition? He said, that you be there. Oh. So they had to call the veterinarian and say they want this done on Saturday when our psychiatrist can be there, if you will. And so they were all holding hands with the dog as the dog passed.
Oh, wow.
And I forgot about that incident, and 3 months later, I get a call from the State Veterinarian Association wanting me to give a talk. And I said, I think you have the wrong doctor. I'm a
right, you're
doctor, you know, I think you need a veterinarian. Aren't you the doctor that went to Livermore and helped his family? Yeah, I am. He said, no, we want you. I said, well, if you're going to take me, I want you to bring some of the children that I deal with who have cancer, but also have had animals that died. And it was an amazing experience for me to get out of the way and let the kids really help the audience deal with this.
You let the children be the teachers.
Yeah. And a couple months later, they did a big article in their magazine about these kids and how they're dealing with death.
Now, when let's say someone newly gets a diagnosis of a terminal condition, how do you start to help them deal with that process? What do you tell them?
We sure don't tell them what to do or how to feel.
Or how to die.
We open the door for them to help each other and to learn to listen to each other. And it's an amazing thing that happens when kids start to talk to each other and listen to each other. They have a bond. Maybe the second week that we were in operation, an 11-year-old girl was playing ball, and the ball hit her head, and her wig fell off, and she's completely bald. And no one knew at that school that she had cancer. And everyone got frightened, and she refused to go to school. The mother read an article about the paper, about her work, and she and the daughter reluctantly came, and she came into the room with 12 other people, children, who were all bald. And all of a sudden, she felt a sense of bondage, a sense of, well, these people know what I'm going through. And it's that common bond of love that when you're helping another person with love, you're not thinking of your body and you're not thinking of tomorrow, but you're thinking about one of our principles is this instant's the only time there is, which means make this instant the most important, the most inspiring moment of your life by being a love finder and helping other people. We had another woman, I went to a meeting one time, and she was around 55, and she had cancer of the stomach that had metastasized, and told me that she hadn't had a moments of peace for the last 5 years, and she'd read all of our books, and she still doesn't have peace. What could I do to help her? She read all of our books and all that stuff. And another mother was there that had a baby. The thought came to me, asked if I could borrow the baby, and asked this mother, would you be willing for one second to take this baby and think of nothing else but loving the baby? Just focus on loving the baby. Would you be willing to do that? She said, well, I think I could do that, sure. And she held the baby, and then after a couple of seconds, I wanted to take the baby away. No, I would like to hold. I said, well, wait a minute. Were you thinking about your cancer then? No. Were you feeling peace of mind? By golly, I was. And I said, well, your job is to put 2 seconds together, 2 minutes together, 2 weeks together, by learning to rather than being absorbed in whether you're going to die or not, but to realize that there's another way of looking at ourselves, and that our spiritual self, the first principle of attitudinal healing, the essence of our being is love. If you experience that, you begin to realize that your real identity is a spiritual one, and that you are an eternal being, and that you're not a body. We have to learn to look past the bodies and recognize there's nothing to fear about death, because there is no death, because bodies is another illusion that we have, another dream state that's built on a fearful ego that makes us try to control everything in the world and then find out we can't really control anything except our own thoughts, which means we can learn to change our attitudes about how we look at life, how we look at death, and how we look at material things versus how we look at love. And when love becomes our reality, we begin to feel much more peace, and we see ourselves experiencing oneness with everyone in terms of who we are and what we are and our Creator.
That's amazing. Dr. Cirincione, you've dealt a lot with adults who
Right. My work is
are
with
newly
adults.
diagnosed with a terminal illness. What do you tell them when they come and talk to you about just finding out that their life may be shorter than they expected?
Well, we can do it on an individual basis, but we also do it in the group situation.
Mhm.
And there's something beautiful about being in the not knowing. And I remember Jerry made a comment when he got the American Medical Association's award you mentioned before, the Excellence in Medicine Pride in the Profession in 2005. And he stood in front of the entire AMA, the board, in the big international meeting, and he said, one of the most important things I learned in all these years of practicing medicine was that I absolutely don't know what's best for another person.
How profound.
And I saw tears coming in the eyes, and residents, doctors came up later, and they were saying, oh my God, I felt that same thing myself. But what Jerry said after that was so beautiful too. And I'm paraphrasing it, but he basically said, but I know how to create an environment that helps a person feel safe enough and clear enough that they can go inside and ask for their own best wisdom. And in medicine, we can certainly give out, we know 1 + 1 = 2. And based on that, we can deal with medicine. But as far as the individual finding their way of living the rest of their life, when they know generally how much time that is, and it's maybe not another 50 years, but it's maybe a year or 6 months, and no one knows for sure, but generally, for us, the key, and for me, the key is to certainly I have to be at peace with my own life, my own living, my own dying, my own separation from the body. Because there's only one fear in the entire world. They all look different. You know, your kid's dying, your husband left you, whatever. There's a war. All these. The one common fear in all of it is the fear of separation from something or someone. No matter what fear you have, just ask, what am I afraid of being separate from? And that's where your attachment is. And so I think that it's very important, if you're going to be working in this area, not to have it all down already, but to know that you're on the journey of learning about your own living and about your own dying. That's the preciousness of it. That's the gift of the giving and receiving, the principle of attitudinal healing, that, you know, as we give, so we receive. And you're always, one moment you're a student and one moment you're a teacher. It just keeps being interchangeable. So these little kids that Jerry mentioned so beautifully, that have touched his life and touched all of our lives through their stories, that they, at one moment they're a student, one moment they're a teacher, you know. And so
part of the process, you're saying, is to help or to create an environment where that person can find their own path
well, that's the
to
core.
peace.
That's what the attitudinal healing support group is. It's a place where a lot of people have never ever had the experience of being loved unconditionally at the moment. I have had that. I have a mother that's like that, and she's 92, and I've never known a moment that she's judged me, but I think that's a very rare situation. But in the group, you learn yourself about your own judgments, your own advice, your own legal mind, and they're going, oh yeah, but if you only knew this, or gosh, I know that this looks like the best thing for you. So you learn to quiet all that down and be very, very present with another human being, whether you're in the group or you're holding their hand when they're dying. And it's learning how to really be very, very present. And it's so much less about what you say than about who you are and the energy that you bring to that situation. And so every person that comes to attitudinal healing, whether you're a child, whether you're the founder, Jerry Jampolsky, you all come and you work in this work for your own healing. And as you heal, the world heals with you. Because unless you have these things healed inside of you, you're going to be projecting out your own fears onto the rest of the world. And it's a journey. It's a journey that we go on together.
Terry, you've asked the question 2 or 3 times, what do you say? And really the issue is not what you say. It's the energy that you bring into the room. The biggest gift that we can give another person when they're dying is our lack of fear and our inner peace and our love. And I think more oftentimes when I'm holding a patient's hand and just being with them in their silence, that more is communicated that's helpful to the patient than if I'm trying to say some fancy words or have a prescription about how someone should die. We had, in Hawaii here actually, there's a lady named Mimi. We were doing a workshop, and Di and I were visiting on the last Sunday, and they came up to me and said, this woman, here's Mimi. Her son died 5 years ago, and she's been here for the last 3 days, and she really doesn't get what attitudinal healing is about, and maybe you could talk with her for a while. And I said, well, sure, I'll be glad to. And I sat down with her, and she said, you know, I was a social worker the other day, and she said, Mimi, you've been crying for 5 years. It's time you stop crying and get on with life. And I thought about that for a moment. I got a piece of paper out and said, you know, I'm a medical doctor. I can write prescriptions. Yeah, I know that. So I wrote a prescription. I said, Mimi, you can cry as much as you want, as long as you want the rest of your life. Don't let another person tell you there's a certain way that you should be dying. And
or grieving.
Grieving, yeah.
Yeah.
And she smiled. And then someone just walked by, and I asked him, can you come here? And he sat down here. And I said, maybe I'm going to give you an opportunity. This is your son. Imagine this is your son. Make it real, and you have 5 minutes to talk to him. And what she did was just get angrier and angrier for his leaving her, and with all the things that he left her with. And
he was going to take care of her.
And,
she was her only child.
And she just got exhausted from getting rid of her anger. And all of a sudden, she looked at him and put his arms around him and said, I forgive you. I love you so much.
Oh, my.
Then she went on
great.
saying, I know Diane's going to California, and you're going to stay here, and I know you like to dance, and there's a dance coming up at the El Moana Hotel on Friday night. Could you meet me there? I said, well, sure. And so I got a lei, and I came there and gave it to her. And gosh, she was a great dancer. And we just
She
had
was like 85 or something, wasn't
we
she?
had so much fun. And then the guy who acted as her son came there, and
Oh,
he was
great.
there, and she ended up being a volunteer for the center here, helping people deal with loss and grief as a way of self-healing. I'll never forget that. And then when we left, there were no taxis. There's just a great big long white limousine, and the doorman saw me hesitate. He said, "Oh, that limousine only charges like a taxi does." So she got to go home in a limousine, and it was a great evening.
Oh, how nice. That's great. That's a great story. Now, so I know that one of the situations you found yourself in was after these kids would pass on. Now you had the grieving parents to deal with. Now, I understand that one of the most difficult things in life is to lose a child. That's one of the
Well, you have children, you can just imagine.
Right.
Mm.
So how do you help them deal with that?
Well, let me give you an example. There's an amazing woman named Cheryl Shohan. She had 2 children, a son that got cancer.
At 11.
No.
The daughter got it.
daughter
She-
got
She
cancer
was
first.
13,
And she got cancer first.
Kamala.
And that was healed. And then he got cancer and died.
Oh,
And now the other child was dying and died. And
Within a year
I
of
happened
each
to be
other.
there in her house, and Dr. Kubler-Ross was there at the same time. And my suggestion was that they come to the center and start helping other parents who are dealing with this. Because they've been through this in a way that no one else could be through. And they just did such a wonderful job to help these people. And she eventually got a paid job at the center and started a home and hospital visitation group. And she, when someone was dying, I often would send her there because she knew more about this. And she was just a light. Everyone saw the light in her. It was no question about the light. She became very close to us. His husband and she first decided to have another child. Most people thought no one would ever want to get a third child for fear the boy would get cancer. And his name is Joseph, and I'm the godfather, and Kubler-Ross is the godmother.
oh man! Wow, that's
in that, and I see.
And when she
Wonderful.
died, I became the adopted, I'm the new godmother.
Yeah.
oh, gosh,
And
that's
when
great.
we're in California, I see him once a week for lunch on Friday noon.
I think the beautiful work, though, that these, especially Cheryl did, she was at the center about 35 years and was living with cancer about 20 years, too. Their family had an exposure to something. And she passed about 2 years ago. The beauty of Cheryl was that she started this group for parents of kids, and this is in the 70s. And there was even no such thing as a support group when the center started. The word support group wasn't part of the vernacular even. So this model that got televised a lot became well known. Well, I believe she created the model that you see now in a lot of the hospitals and care units for parents who have children that are life threatened. And then they started a group for children whose parents either had died or who are ill, perfectly healthy kids. So that this model is used in many, many different ways.
Now, part of our discussion is about grief and loss, and it doesn't have to be a death in the family.
Right.
How do you help people who have had other kinds of losses? And what are other kinds of losses that people grieve over that
Well,
they
you-
have
Well,
difficulty?
today, loss of a job, loss of your home, come up there
Sure.
pretty far.
Right, and that's actually quite relevant today
Yeah.
because so many people are
And
under stress.
We've started groups on attitudinal healing for these people who are suffering this loss. So they,
Loss of job, loss of home. That's pretty. Boy, that's pretty traumatic.
So they learn how to forgive, if you will, and not hang on and relish their anger, and to see their anger, feel it, but not hold on to it, which means not to hurt themselves anymore. And again, what we find so helpful is finding a way that these people can volunteer and help other people, whether it's in a school, or whether it's in a hospital, or whether it's with the retirement home. And it's fascinating how when one is in this consciousness of helping people, it's one of the best ways of dealing with your loss and grief.
I think also that loss, we all have a lot of different things we lose in our lives. I don't think we're as conscious. We're conscious about the loss. I don't think we're as conscious about the grief. And whether it's, families that lose pets, it's not just the death of the big things like human beings that are important to us, but it could be the loss of a friend when you're 7 years old, or kids gang up, or the bullying, or all these different things, loss of self-esteem in some way. We're born these incredible beings, full of light and love, and so often and through most of our lives that there's ways that gets chopped down. So there's always loss there, loss of faith, loss of belief system. Attitudinal healing is all about belief systems and how we believe, how we construct the belief systems in our minds, and how we can actually change them. We need to never suggest what someone should change them to, but just help them understand that if this is like not working for you, you could change your belief system, about it. So I think one of the biggest things about loss and grief is the unidentified grief that does go with loss. And so we talk about that a lot. We have a lot of school programs, Power to Choose program out here at Eva High,
Right.
fifth year, and it's in many places, Nigeria, Outer Mongolia. I mean, it's in a lot. I'm not joking.
Right.
It actually is in Outer Mongolia at our center there, and kids talk about the things that are painful for them in their lives. Parents divorcing is incredible loss for kids.
That's a big loss for a lot of folks.
There's the detailed things about, a loss of home or room or stability or that, but it's really loss of that foundation of the family unit, even if it was a really destructive unit. For the child, that was actually what they knew. So a lot of the work in the support group is creating an environment where the child can really start to get in touch with those feelings. And unlike some groups where you sort of spiral into your pity patter party, and also, or you get talking about outer details, like if people who are life threatened, if you get so focused on the drugs and the other things you're doing, we often, the facilitator is there to keep a safe environment. And one of the things the facilitator could say is, you have lots of time in your life to work on those other areas, but this time now, these hours are just for you. How are you feeling about that situation? What's going on inside of you? And for people, I know my stepdad of 36 years, my beloved Larry, who married to my mom after both their spouses died. I was with them the moment they met and held him when he died, my mother and I. And he was a chief pilot at TWA, first in the system, big management guy, the whole thing, big guy, and he got Lewy body disease, which is kind of a combination between Parkinson's and a dementia. And he wound up going to the Center for Attitudinal Healing as he was losing his physical control. And he came back from a group one day. And this was so profound for me because I often think of it as there for other people. But when my own stepdad came back and he sat me down, and he had tears running down his eyes, he said, today in the group I really broke down. And they held me. And he said, I felt like I took off my last mask. And he said, I was feeling guilty about Mom and all of this happening and leaving her with my dying. And I took off my last mask. And he said, I'm more who I am now than I've ever been in my life. And
That's
he
amazing.
said, it's a shame it's so late, but at least it happened.
Oh,
And
that's
at
great.
that, I was just like crying, and I was so grateful for the work we all do, that was there for my father,
It was a safe environment where he knew that no one was going to judge him for crying.
Right.
Now here's a guy with strong
Right.
controls about
Right.
everything in life.
Running
Sure.
747s. And,
Oh, that's actually a tough thing for men more than for
Sure.
women. And a lot in local culture, a lot of the Asian cultures, men aren't supposed to break down and cry or anything like that.
We do our best to teach people the power of listening without judgment, without interrupting.
really
And I remember this kid, his name was Tinman Walker, and he had been in coma for many months.
Well, he was a ski star. He was a teenage kid, came down a hill on a bike and got hit, ran into a truck.
Oh, gee.
And so then he went into the coma. Go ahead, Jerry.
And then he got out of the coma, and he still had aphasia and paralysis, and he could walk, but with the paralysis. And the parents heard about our center and came, and he has a great sense of humor, and he likes telling jokes. But he talks very slowly and hesitantly, and if he's talking out there, people finish the joke for him. They get tired of. They want to get to the end of it.
Or they're uncomfortable and they want to,
These,
make up for
these
it.
kids in his group didn't interrupt him once.
Great.
And he
That's
said,
great.
golly, this is the first time I've been able to finish a joke since I've had my accident. And I started to cry because these kids were so sensitive to what he was going through that they listened with love without interrupting or trying to do it for him, but allowed him to do it himself.
So, if we just sum up this, maybe one area of it, Dr. Shintani, I'd say that loss and grief all has to do with being separate from, whether it's someone you love, whether it's being separated from your body, from life, separated from your job, separated from your home through financial difficulties. It's all that fear I mentioned before, the fear of separation. And love, Jerry's first book, the title is so profound, even if you never read the book, that love is letting go of fear.
Right, and the fear is the fear of separation.
It's the fear of separation from something or someone. And when someone is feeling loss, it usually comes up in the shape of abandonment, depression, everything else. And it's helpful to ask yourself, what is it that I am feeling separate from? What is it I'm afraid of? And then to go, especially if you're by yourself, to ask that question and work that backwards. And then you can make new choices about it. You don't have to stay in that place. Attitudinal healing is healing our attitudes about our beliefs, that we're stuck in the way we think. We have a choice about the thoughts we put in our minds. We may not be able to control the world, but we can control our own minds.
Now, how do you help folks deal with the blame and the anger game if they've lost something and they're blaming and they're angry about that?
It's a big part of the human condition, I think, being angry, blaming, and the question is not what happens when we feel our human emotions. The question is, how long do you want to stay there? How long do you want to stay angry? Especially when it's justified. But how long do you want to stay that? Because actually, you're the one that determines it. You think you're not, but you actually are. And that is one of the great secrets to life, that you determine how long you're going to be in a certain state. It's not for us to determine.
It's
but you
learning to
can.
see no value in blame. To really understand that when you're blaming someone, throwing a rock at them, it comes right back and hits you in the face. And
Doesn't mean they're not responsible for what they do.
and I have I wouldn't call it a rope trick, but we demonstrate like
A rope trick.
with a rope to Dinah in tug of war, and she didn't do something I wanted her to do, and I'm throwing her rocks made of guilt to try to manipulate her to do it my way.
And of course, I'm going to throw them back again,
So we both got these garbage cans, and I go way down there, and I pick up something that happened, 20 years ago. Think this will really get to her, and we keep doing that. And then we ask the audience, how do we stop this? Because most of us play the game of guilt and blame because we listen to our ego voice, not the voice of love. And then finally someone said, well, you should let go. And Diane lets go of the rope. And I said, well, she's more spiritual than I. And I go out and find another person to play the game. Because
play the
oftentimes
game
we divorce, and then we find another person.
Or
and we
the
play
game of addictions.
And
It's
we're
all
playing the
the
game
same.
again.
Right.
So it's learning not to see value in the game
And to let it go.
and to see value
Right.
in not attacking the other person anymore.
I think your book, Goodbye to Guilt, Jerry, is a fabulous book, though. Really a fabulous book. And, when Jerry was...
Which book is that?
Goodbye to Guilt.
Goodbye to
It's
Guilt.
a classic. And when he was writing it back in the early 80s, I'll never forget, he asked me, we were out having lunch one time. It was early in our relationship. He was asking everybody he knew, what do you feel most guilty about? I was like making everybody crazy. So he asked me at lunch one day, and I said, don't think I feel guilty about anything. And Jerry's way, he was just quiet for a moment, you know.
I knew that wasn't true, but
I I had nothing in my conscious
said,
mind.
That's her belief.
But then when I stopped, I just stopped for a minute, closed my eyes. I thought, do I feel guilty about anything? And what came out of my mouth changed my life. I said, oh my God, I think what I feel most guilty about is wanting my father to have been someone other than who he was.
Oh, wow.
And that was the beginning of the journey of healing with my father, who had died when I was about 19 and had a lot of issues, violence issues, etc. But it was the beginning of my healing process, realizing it wasn't what my father did anymore that made me upset. It was my thoughts about my father that was causing me the pain in the present. And that was key.
Well, and that helps in the process of forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely. Begins the journey of forgiveness. And there is no future without forgiveness, as Desmond Tutu says.
We didn't mention forgiveness with the dying patient.
Mm-hmm.
And we do open the door for someone to look at things in their life that they may still feel badly about in terms of themselves or someone else. And we've found that when people are able to look at that and actually do forgive themselves for the other person, that the pain medication and the chemotherapy become more effective
Huh.
when they let go of that stuff.
It has a clinical value.
There's actually lots of
The
research
clinical
now
value.
on forgiveness, as the
It's
three of us
amazing.
know. And I know we're sort of at the end of our talk, too, but that we know that there's a lot of research now to confirm all of these beliefs.
Now, is forgiving oneself one of the more difficult and important tasks?
You know, I said to someone earlier this evening who was having a hard time forgiving herself, I said, here's the secret to the universe. It's a lot harder to not forgive than it is to forgive.
Oh, there you go.
And certainly, yes, forgiveness of self. It's hard to forgive. We think it's easier to forgive someone else, and maybe it is, but the reality is that unless we forgive ourselves, we are projecting off all the guilt and the blame onto all of our other relationships.
We carry a lot of images in our head in little rooms about things we were criticized by our parents. Maybe 50% of parents have not really totally forgiven their parents. We set images of self-condemnation. And part of our work is to help people learn to let go of their self-condemnation and be free, and to know that forgiveness is what really sets us free. Forgiveness is really what brings us into that atmosphere of unconditional love and happiness. And so when we're not happy, it's because we made a decision not to be happy and that we don't deserve to be loving to ourselves.
Most of us don't really believe we deserve the right to be happy. And when you ask yourself that question, do I believe I really deserve to be happy? Listen to what the answer is, because whatever the answer is that's really how your life is going. Because if you don't really believe you deserve the right to be happy, which is most people, we create situations that will make us unhappy. Forgiveness, the Greatest Healer of All, is one of our books that I think covers a lot of that too, for anyone who's wanting to do some additional work in forgiveness.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the resources people can get to help them through some of this. You have several books. You just mentioned one, Forgiveness is the Greatest Healer. Is that what?
Greatest Healer of All, right? Number of books too. Teach Only Love.
Teach Only
is
Love
a classic on
is an
attitudinal
absolute
healing
classic,
for
yes.
someone to learn about it. Love is letting go of fear. Love is the answer, and they're all on the website ahinternational.org. And we have support groups. We have the Hawaii Center for Attitudinal Healing.
Right.
Here has been here for many years.
Right,
and that's
that
listed.
that
And you are on the
website
board of
is
that, the board of
right,
directors?
right,
Yes.
right, and that's
And,
ahhawaii.org.
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 Teenagers and young adults, I wrote a book called, it might shock you a little bit, The Old Shit Factor,
Yes.
Waste Management for Our Minds. It's a language that many people in prison and many other people who are young might never read a spiritual book or one of our books.
They love it. They love this book.
And they
it's real
really
simple.
relate to
Oh,
it.
it'll get to a completely different group of people with a title like that.
I think one of the books, though, that's the biggest help is a mini course for life.
I
And,
think so.
Yes, an 18-day mini course, and it's a
mini
mini
course,
course for life.
Once again, ahinternational.org.
www.ahinternational.org.
And
We're having our big international conference in September of
Yes.
2014. People
We
are coming
should-
from around the
people-
world
right.
to San Francisco, and all that'll be on the website soon.
and of course ahhawaii.org,
Yes.
our local chapter of the attitudinal healing.
And you have support groups here
We have-
and also on Kauai and on the Big Island.
Okay, any final comments? We've got about a minute and a half left.
I'm just so grateful to what you do, Dr. Terry Shintani. We've known you for decades, and I tell you, you just never stop giving. I think this is a fabulous show. I'd like to see it nationwide.
Oh, thank you.
And I would like to open the door to your listeners to realize that what power the thoughts they have in their mind are, and that when they choose to experience love rather than fear, choose to be a love finder rather than a fault finder, choose to teach and demonstrate love rather than fear as they go through life, that their lives are going to be much richer, their fear of death will start to disappear, and they will make love the only reality that there is in their life.
And you know what I've learned from both of you? As a physician, I've attended the death of people, the ending of life, and I'm sure you have as well, both of you. And it just rings so true because so many times I've seen people right at the end of their life, and what
Now it's
mattered
time for
most
Healing in You.
was how much love they gave while they were here.
Absolutely.
That's it.
And it was virtually nothing else mattered except how much love they gave
As
while
Mother
they were here
Teresa
on earth.
says, it's not how much you do in life that counts, it's how much love you do it with.
And you're great teachers of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jerry Jampolsky and Dr. Diane Cirencioni.
Thanks for having us.
All right. I want to thank everyone for listening and viewing this show. I wish all of you the Lord's blessings always. Aloha.